with your choosing, with your allowance, with your free will, this intelligent sentience, which is the unified source behind all that there apparently seems to be, is let in to your home by your choosing. And this is a gift, this is an act, a courageous act, I might add, especially from the human point of view, to disown every aspect of it, the pain, the suffering, the ambition, the struggle, the hopes, the needs, and all of it. If you can give it back to source, disown your life. What you give up is your sense of ownership of your life, that it's yours. What you will find is that hello everyone, can you hear me? Wonderful. Okay, let's start with a minute more of silence. Take a few deep breaths and relax. Prepare the grounds of your psyche for the session to come. Be empty, absorbent, open-minded, receptive. You don't need to know anything. You don't need to want anything. You can just rejoice in the presence that is here. And absorb today's session, trusting that you'll naturally absorb whatever is relevant or resonant for you, and you will naturally repel or leave to the side what doesn't serve you at this time. Wonderful. I wrote a few pages today, as sometimes recently is the case before the Bentinho Live Sessions. I think part of the reason why, because I never really prepare anything for retreats or sessions, but the audience in a sense is quite varied, different levels of experience, different backgrounds. And so I think I want to just capture everything as clearly as I can and make sure the session is set on a certain trajectory with clarity for all. So anyhow, I will be reading about 5 pages, which will set the tone for today, and then from there I will just free flow accordingly, and or we can have some Q&A at the end. As you know, a little preface, this is the follow-up session. So it's titled The Non-Possessive Life, Part 2, The Advanced Way, whereas Part 1 was more of an introduction. More practical in a way. This is more all-consuming or advanced. And so this may or may not make a lot of sense to all of you, but I think for most of you it will make a lot of sense, and for those of you who it doesn't make a total sense for, at least it will resonate or inspire into this pathway. So, the Non-Possessive Life, Part 2, The Advanced Way. The non-possessive life, in its more advanced stages, means the adept, that is you, lives as if he had already died. His personal life has been surrendered. His sovereignty, although technically intact, has been offered back to the intelligence of the oneness whence it was granted in the first place. He has given up his sense of personhood, has donated his physical life to be used for the welfare of other selves, and has sacrificed his personal ambitions for the inspirations of oneness which move him in harmony with all that there is, and thus lead others to that harmony too. Yet he is not morbid, depressed, skeptical, or nihilistic. He does not feel like a victim, nor remorses over his sacrificed personal life, or the simple sensory or relational pleasures he may be missing out on as a result of his surrender. Once he has come to a full acceptance of his existence as personally non-existent, he rejoices in the nature of oneness. The bliss and awakeness of wholeness moves through him, and yet even this bliss is left alone as it is, attributed to the one source to which it belongs. He does not claim ownership of even his spiritual journey and accomplishment. For he simply understands, has surrendered to, and agrees with the truth which is so obvious to his awakened eye, and which he has found so evidently within the directness of his own existence beyond his personal beliefs, which is that everything belongs to the oneness, and there is no separate or personal him apart from the oneness, nor is there anything here for him aside from that oneness. He sees through the mentally fabricated illusions of ownership, possession, duality, separation, cause and effect, achievement, validation, and so on. He lives not for himself, for what is himself besides the oneness of being. He sees beyond the veil of the thinking thinker, and he knows reality is not a thought, not found in one or by means of one, nor is reality found in the thinker itself, whom is empty of separate substance. Reality he has found, simply as it is, in the lucid, cognizant absence of the thinker and thought. As the poet Kabir accurately stated, I felt in need of a great pilgrimage, so I sat still for 3 days, and God came to me. The non-possessor does not live for personal glory and knows that he stands to gain nothing from this life of form, nor from his actions within it. He knows that the only thing he stands to gain from this life is to realize the truth and to live in obedience to it. He knows that his freedom is not of the personal world, but to realize the nature of reality directly as above and beyond the personal world, and to assist as many others as he can in the meantime. He is here to be like the hollow flute which allows for the breath of God to whisper and occasionally blast harmony and awakening into this world of illusions. Though the people may credit or discredit the flute for the harmonies produced, the non-possessor does not receive this credit or discredit as his own. He passes it straight back to the source of this harmony, which is clearly not the instrument. Verse 10 of the Tao Te Ching. Hold fast to the power of the One. It will unify the body and merge it with the spirit. It will cleanse the vision and reveal the world as flawless. It will focus the life force and make one supple as a newborn. As you love the people and rule the state, can you be free of self-interest? As the gates of heaven open and close, can you remain steadfast as the mother bird who sits on her nest? As your wisdom reaches the four corners of the world, can you keep the innocence of a beginner? Know this primal power that guides without forcing, that serves without seeking, that brings forth and sustains life, yet does not own or possess it. One who holds this power brings Tao to this very earth. He can triumph over a raging fire or the freeze of winter weather. Yet when he comes to rule the world, it's with the gentleness of a feather. The requirement of living in accordance with the non-possessive life. To step fully into the bliss, love, clarity, and compassionate natural state of freedom, that non-possessive, generous way of life which is innate and germane to reality itself, one is required truly to do only one thing: to choose to surrender all sense of ownership of one's concept of a personal self. This can be done through sheer faith in, or through clear realization of, the unified nature of all that there is. Either path, faith or recognition, will lead to the spiritual fruits and outcomes of the other path, for their timeless destination is only one. Some of the means to surrender. Here are some means to inspire the surrender and up the conscious will of the adept to make such a radical choice of not possessing a self. These are just some examples. Seeing clearly how the personal life is cyclical, repetitive, deluded, in an echo chamber of its own making, thus removed from reality and truth, boring, a struggle, and ultimately fruitless, disappointing, and illusory. That will cure you quickly. As the Buddha said, life is suffering. But there is a way out. Another example of a means to cultivate the surrender. Seeing and sensing clearly and appreciating with profound humility the beauty and intelligence of this oneness in everything, yet without doing so for any personal gain. Seeing clearly that the idea of a separate personal self is a self-created concept only, thus unreal, inaccurate, untrue, and stifling. Another means is seeing clearly that the idea of possessing anything is a complete delusion, since you as a person did not create anything. Seeing clearly and with logic that since you did not create all that is, yet all that is clearly exists, this means some other intelligence or power did create it, and thus all that is belongs to whatever created it, not to you as a self-concept. Another means would be to meditate on the nature of awareness and beingness itself, ideally from a mostly thoughtless state of lucid consciousness. You realize that I am before the thinker and his thoughts appear. Dive into that I am. Get to know it directly without thoughts, interpretations, or words. In I am, nothing of a possessive nature survives. Only truth and freedom are revealed. The result, then, is that the adept, which is you, lives more and more as it is. What does it mean to live life more and more as it is? It means to live more and more from a state of consciousness that is beyond the nature of thoughts and their supposed thinker, or the idea of a small, personal, separate self. Since no thought can adequately reveal reality, life as it truly is not an interpretation made by a thought or thinker, but simply as it is, and can only be realized as it is, not as we think it to be. Ergo, in order to align to life as it actually is, one must surrender all delusions of personhood, ownership, and possession, and loosen to a great extent the attachment to experiencing the nature of the self by means of thought alone. When the possessor and its thinker dissolves, the clouds of delusion clear, and what stands naturally revealed is the thoughtless evidence of reality as it actually is, unexplainable to any mind, by any mind, since it is free from all mental speculation, interpretations, or personal beliefs. However, it is real, and it can be lived in accordance with, just not by means of possession or thinking. When, either through sheer faith and surrender of the sense of self, or through clear and repeated recognition of the indescribable state of self-evident reality beyond the grasping and groping limited comprehensions of the thinking mind, life as it actually is, actually grokked, the adept's faculties of living, thinking, and acting are now transfigured into a form that is ever more commensurate with this nature of reality and its intelligent ways which transcend the conceptual mind altogether. This transfiguration happens naturally and by the intelligence which is tapped into once the illusory personal mind has been surrendered back to its real source. This transfiguration is not performed by the personal mind. It is, again, the breath of this underlying intelligence which, once tapped, begins to rearrange the harmonies that are being expressed through this instrument of the mind-body-spirit complex. This transfiguration is to be attributed only to the self, capital S, or the oneness within all. Some call this intelligent concept transcending sentience, God, that which is. Although rarely do people know what exactly they are pointing to with that word, nevertheless, what people intuitively mean when they use this word God is life as it actually exists, freely beyond the mind, which is directly accessible to the radically courageous, non-possessive adept who is willing to have their sense of personhood die before their body dies. This, again, is realized through either one's directly enlightened conscious awareness through an immediate and consistent recognition of reality as it actually is beyond the thinking mind, or by means of the sheer surrender of him or herself to their faith in this reality beyond the personal self. Since the thinking mind cannot perceive or capture life as it actually is, one must, if one wishes to become a man or woman of God, awaken from one's ever-personalizing thinker by surrendering the possessive, self-centered attitude altogether. To see and live as life is, we must first be willing to lose every false attachment or ambition that our possessive, conceptual minds have produced within us. And one of the fastest ways towards this is to practice this principle of non-possessive being. This is the way of being which has donated its personal views, opinions, and preferences to the intelligent beingness within all that is. And I'll close it with a brief poem. A non-possessive life. The less you possess, the less you'll obsess, and the more you'll be God or Goddess. The more that you carry, the more you will bury, and the more you'll be man or woman. The more you think not, the more you are God, and the truer shall be what's begot. Where before you would take, you now have no stake, and thus life will be living awake. This is the path of one without self, one who has gone and thus won. Leave ye then your possessions behind, and turn towards God from mankind. For God, yourself, and mankind. So that will be the introduction for today. I hope this resonates. I hope you get the gist of it intuitively. So where part 1 of the non-possessive life that we had 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago, was more practical and it related more to relationships and the things in your life and so on. This session, the advanced way, I want to open it up for the non-possessive life principle to be applied to your own sense of self, aka everything, because your sense of self is essentially everything you've identified with. Relationships belong to this, your material gains belong to this, your career choices and so on and so forth. Even your spiritual progress, although not ultimately belonging to your personal created sense of self, it is nevertheless hijacked by it. It is nevertheless possessed by it, taken on by it, interpreted by it, filtered through it, and so on and so forth. So even a lot of your spiritual journey has been infiltrated by possessiveness. Who here does genuinely not feel in possession of their own spiritual journey? Not as in out of control, because you can often feel like it's not really in your control, but that's different. Even if it's, whether it feels like it's in control and going well, or it's chaotic and maybe out of control, not going so well, according to your judgment, which again belong only to the thinker anyway. But how many of you genuinely do not feel like your spiritual journey or your advancement or your understanding of life is yours, is not yours? How many of you genuinely feel like it's not your possession? That it is in fact a gift to God, by God, for God, through God, as God, due to God, enabled by God, powered by God, for God's intention only. You're just a vehicle. What is you then? If you and God are two, and you are the vehicle and God is the source and the intent and the purpose of it all, what is this you? Are you the vehicle? For analogy, if you're driving your car somewhere, are you your car? Are you your vehicle? So then what's living inside of that vehicle? And what is that truly? What are you? This real you has been clouded, although in truth it is this source that we keep referring to, or this oneness, to whom all belongs. That is you. That's what you really are. However, there's these layers of assumption, of concepts, of thinking that have covered, like a veil, like a flimsy little veil, the true light of the sun, to a degree where the sun has forgotten it is the sun. So what you technically do when you surrender your life and you die before you die is that what you're surrendering cannot be real, first of all. Technically, this is an impossibility. Everything you can possibly lose never really existed, at least not permanently. It may have appeared to exist. It may have existed as an appearance in your life, as an experience, as a momentary shape within your consciousness, just like a dream at night. It takes different shapes and it comes and goes. The dream, you could say loosely, exists, but it exists only as a dream. You're not dreaming about an actual world that actually exists, whether you dream about it or not. Similarly, exactly the same in fact, maybe minus some parameter changes. But to my point, quite exactly, have we never experienced a thing We've only ever experienced our experience of a thing. In fact, we don't even know if there is an of a thing. We only know our experience. And so, as an experience, things might be said to be relatively real, as an experience. Well, we cannot venture out into land of assumptions and state and claim and believe and live an entire life based in. I mean, we can and we do, most people do, but it's not the way to truth. It's not the way to clarity. It's not the way to enlightenment. To assume that there is actual things and actual selves and actual persons. There's experiences of all these things. So when you, as a seeker, commit to the act of giving away any sense of ownership, any sense of possession of any part of yourself, body, mind, spirit, emotions, physical life, house, car, wife, husband, child, parent, friend, attainments, validation, status, respectability, anything you can pinpoint, anything you can identify whatsoever. The act of surrendering that, which yes is a mental act, but you're constantly groping these things as a mental act as well. You're not actually possessing what you think you're possessing. The act of possession is an act of possessing. It's not a reality. That's why I mentioned one of the means to realizing the non-possessive life is to realize already I don't possess anything. Because clearly I did not create the apparent molecules that are right now allowing me to breathe in oxygen and process this intelligently into some other form that then sustains another form, and so on and so forth. I did not put the planets in their orbit. Not as this self, anyway, not as the instrument. But the planets are in their orbits. And life does exist. So something did create that. For you see, I think intuitively most people can agree to the dictum, nothing can come of nothing. Something or nothing, something or anything cannot come out of nothing. True nothing cannot produce something, because by definition, something is and nothing isn't. So you could also say, isness cannot come of not isness. What is cannot come of what is not. Okay? So nothing can come of nothing. Now, if you agree that nothing can come of nothing, that means there is something. Hey, simple or no? If there is something, if something exists, that means there is a source. Because nothing can come from nothing. So if something is there, there must be a source. The source must be a reality. It must be something. Now, it might not be a thing, as we typically define a thing, as in an object with properties and so on. But it still is, somehow. Even if it has no form, no shape, no time, no dimensions, no material attributes, nothing to its name that can define it. Yet it is. And here we are. If nothing can come of nothing, and therefore there is something, meaning call it existence or life or isness, that means, has to mean, even logically speaking, that there is a source, because nothing can come of nothing. So if something is here, nothing can come of nothing, therefore there is a source. Now, by definition, a source must be singular. Because if you have two sources, then neither of them is source. For where did they come from? By definition, a source must be one. So there is clearly something here. You exist. You know that you are. There is experience. Something is here. Nothing can come of nothing. Hence, there must be a source. And it doesn't matter how you define that, if you call it intelligent or random or whatever, everythingness, nothingness, beyond both, whatever. But the fact is, something is here, nothing can come of nothing, therefore there is a source. And because there is a source, that source must be one by definition. Otherwise, it wouldn't be source. It would be just another materialization or manifestation. And then where did that come from? If that is, and nothing can come of nothing, then source, out of one of the 2 or 3 or 4 infinite sources, would also need a source. So you see, by definition, at the end of the line of both logic and meditation and self-surrender, what you find, my dear friends, is yourself as a singular, infinite perfection that cannot be described, that cannot be thought about, but it's as real as anything you've ever imagined to be real. More real than the experience you're having right now of listening to my voice. In comparison, that is very unreal. When you realize this directly, your senses, your mind, your thoughts are obliterated, penetrated, perforated, dissolved, evaporated. In contrast to the light of the real sun, the candle flame disappears. It holds no candle to the sun. Nothing your mind can come up with holds a candle to life as it is, which is not a concept, it's not a thing, but it does exist. And it is singular. It has to be, and it is. So then this answers the question, what are you? And what do you enter into when you let go of your life, of the possession, the ownership of your life? What can you possibly realize when everything that's not ultimately real is given up? What is logically, naturally, the thing you will land on? The thing that your consciousness will shift to when you stop tuning it to everything that's unreal? What's the only place left to go in the absence of all illusion, provided you remain conscious? Because most people fall asleep when they get close to the realization. But if you maintain awareness, if you manage to maintain an awareness, when the illusion falls asleep, what do you think awareness will be aware of? When all mental interpretation and emotional drama and personal belief systems, when they all die, what remains? If something exists, nothing can come of nothing, therefore what is needs a source, and source by definition must be one, then how many of you are there in ultimate reality? You see, devotion, enlightenment, it's so deliciously logical. Enlightenment is pure logic. It's straight up, unfiltered, clear seeing. It's the most scientific approach, even though it's also the most devotional, radical, mind-transcending approach, uncommon. But it releases the insanity and it makes you sane once again. And like I said in my introduction, not in part 1, but my introduction here that I was reading to part 2, then what happens is a natural transfiguration. This happens over time, usually. Now you can have glimpses of instant perfection of all qualities of God. That is a possibility. But typically those will be glimpses and experiences of a extra-dimensional, timeless nature that cannot be described. But what you'll see more practically and reliably is that on a relatable human, mental, emotional, bodily, action-based level, the real world, as some people call it, ironically, because it's not the real world. But in the quote-unquote real world, is that a transfiguration, a transmutation, a transformation begins to take place rather rapidly in the great scheme of things, in the great cosmic clockwork of things. So gradually, week after week, day after day, month after month, year after year, your mind-body-spirit complex will undergo a transfiguration. Your actions, your ways of thinking, your belief systems, your interpretations, your traumas, your reasons for acting, your motivations, your ambitions, all that will naturally be replaced by source commensurate ways of thinking, being, acting, expressing, and so on. In other words, you will live more and more, moment to moment, without the unpleasant company of yourself, in the pleasant company of your self, as it is. Less and less drama, less and less complication, less and less justifications, defenses, reasons for acting, reasons for being, and so on and so forth. You become a natural man or woman, or as I sometimes call it, a man or woman of God, instead of a man or woman of man. Man is man-made. God is not. So to become a man or woman of God means to be unman-made, to not be made by man. And this is by your choosing. It's not something you are ultimately a victim of. Now, there might be grooves and patterns in your brainwaves and so on that have etched themselves out over years of practice. But these things can be changed, not just on a physicalized brain plasticity level or a neurological level, but also instantly, more instantly, on a mental level. And the actual mind, to which the brain is just a receiver, a translator. So the brain, the mind, the body, the choices, the expressions, these all change according to what you believe. We already know this. Your actions, your choices, your ways of thinking will follow what you believe. And what I'm suggesting here is that you can take this beyond the level of beliefs. But the same principle applies, that wherever your consciousness goes or resides, the mind-body-spirit complex will reflect where you reside, where you live in your heart, in your true self, in your true consciousness. What your true abode is will be reflected, will find its form, its way into your mind, body, spirit, life, relational, material, manifest expression, and so on. You already know this. You're familiar at least with the concept of it, and you probably believe it or have seen evidence for this in your own life. So I'm not trying to convince you here, but the main point in this session that I want to make relevant to this topic of transfiguration is that it happens naturally when you transcend the level of belief systems.
Massaro University is a vibrant online community dedicated to accelerating your awakening and activating your purpose for the benefit of all. Join live sessions with Bentinho and workshops led by experienced facilitators. Deepen your wisdom, empowerment, and self-knowledge, and experience life-changing shifts week after week. At Massaro University, finding like-hearted seekers is easy and inevitable. Lifelong friendships and a shared purpose fuel profound personal and collective growth. Create your free account today at massaro.university and step into a community that's designed to elevate every aspect of your life.
When you change a belief, when you mess around with belief systems, which can be good practice for different purposes, not for the ultimate purpose, but for different reasons, it can be valuable, practical, totally valid, and helpful. But when you're changing around beliefs, you're doing that personally. That's out of personal choice. But when you transcend all beliefs because you give away your life, like consider that for a second, and I'll come back to this in a moment. You give away your right to your own life. That feeling of, I have a right to my own life. That feeling of ownership, possessiveness. Scary proposition for most minds, and that's okay. It can be a little intimidating when you contemplate this. I'm not saying you should dive right into this. I'm just sharing a potential with you here. Like I said, this is the advanced way. That's why I'm glad we're doing it now before public launch of MU, because you guys have more context. At least most of you will have been here for longer and so on. So when you transcend belief system, now the transfiguration that occurs into your mind, body, spirit, life, relational, manifestational, materialization, life aspect, and so on, that transfiguration of form, the shape that you take, the ways of thinking that come through you, are now reconfigured naturally, effortlessly. It is as if God reaches into your body and starts to tinker with your vehicle. The best mechanic in the universe, the one who created your vehicle to begin with. Not just your body, also your mind, and even to a degree your spirit, with your free will. This gets reconfigured, it gets upgraded. It is like going to the mechanic of the creator, mechanic shop of the creator of you. This is therefore not a personal doing. It is simply a choice. So it is due to your free will. It doesn't just happen on its own. You have to first choose for this to occur. You have to first allow for it. It still, even God honors your free will because it's a gift it gave. It's the first distortion out of infinite perfection was that gift, that potential of freedom, of choice, aka awareness, free will. So your awareness is king to you. You as a spark, an expression of this unity, can never be overridden, not even by source. You literally are source granted to yourself the freedom of choice. Wow. So, with your choosing, with your allowance, with your free will, this intelligent sentience, which is the unified source behind all that there apparently seems to be, is let in to your home, your vehicle, by your choosing. And this is a gift, this is an act, a courageous act, I might add, especially from the human point of view. There's not many people that will make this choice in their lifetime because it's a scary proposition. But those who do, either through extreme catalyst and pain and suffering and loss and desperation, when they are on their knees, unable to find any way to get back up, and they have nowhere else to turn, sometimes, if they have the courage not to kill themselves, which I recommend you don't, in those moments, if you ever have them, but if you instead have the courage to turn your miserable existence over to God, to disown every aspect of it, the pain, the suffering, the ambition, the struggle, the hopes, the needs, and all of it. If you can give it back to source, disown your life. Keep the body alive. Take good care of it when you can, to whatever degree you can. But what you give up is your sense of ownership of your life, that it's yours. What you will find is that suffering and bliss suddenly coexist. That this terrible monster called God, who doesn't love you, and the absolute grace of perfection from that same God coexists right there for a moment, until your sorrows are swallowed up completely by the more positive end of the spectrum. But for a brief moment, your suffering and your bliss will coexist. The good God and the bad God, the God who loves you unconditionally and the God who doesn't seem to give a fuck, coexist in that same moment, simultaneously. Right before the good God swallows up the fake God of your own man-made delusion. Before the bliss of self swallows up the suffering attracted to you by your own stubborn ignorance. And so you are set free through catalyst by self, for self, through self. For there is only one you, ultimately speaking. And how can one ever be against itself? It's a technical, logical impossibility. It's technically, mechanically, logically impossible for one thing to oppose itself. So whatever seems to oppose you is a delusion of your own making. And again, where does that exist? Thinking. And again, can we ever find reality in a thought? Nope. Is reality a thought? It might include thoughts, might include everyone's thoughts, but does reality equal a thought? I think it's pretty clear that it does not. So you must be wrong about everything you think in your life. So what you're giving up is the biggest trash bin you can possibly imagine. When you give up yourself, that's what you're giving up. The biggest pile of nonsense that you can ever possibly imagine. Because we've just discovered reality is not found in any thought. Everything you think of that you feel is yours is due to a thought. Therefore, when you give up yourself, which is produced by thought, what do you throw out? Unreality. Hence, you die before you die, and you realize that you cannot die. Voila. The eternal bliss of oneness is yours. As it always has been, right behind the veil of your thinking eyes and your deluded little tongue and ears and skin and the little interpreter that sticks that all together and thinks it knows a little bit about what is life, what is real. Because something appears to its mind to be observed, and it makes a bunch of assumptions, and it builds an entire tertiary, non-existent sense of self out of those conflated sensations, phenomena, perceptions, ideas, leaving oneself with a completely ignorant, biased sense of self that obviously perceives God to be, or reality, or simple isness, to be something other than itself. And what is suffering if not the one trying to oppose itself when that is mechanically impossible? That would put some stress on the system, wouldn't it? To try to mechanically separate something that can never be separated. And yet that's what every single thought in your mind, to some degree, lesser or more, attempts to do. Hence, suffering. So what's the end of suffering? It's to stop opposing the mechanical, logical, technical impossibility to divide what is one. That's not a thought process. Any thought process is a division. Ramakrishna once used the analogy that when the seeker reaches his goal versus when it doesn't reach its goal, you can kind of tell, like you can tell the gurgling sound of filling a container of water by pouring water into it from another container of water. Let's say a bottle of water, and you use that water to pour water into another bottle. And as that bottle or container starts to fill, you hear the bubbling, gurgling sound. As long as that noise of the mind is there, the goal has not been realized. But then suddenly, when the sound is quiet, the bottle is filled and the goal has been reached. Now, this is just an analogy, but the analogy is that the gurgling noise represents the discerning mind, the differentiating mind, the separating, dividing mind, the dualistic mind. And trying to find reality through duality is an impossibility because reality is a unity by definition. Logically, it must be so. It cannot be any other way. This is realized through logic, or meditation, or profound devotion and surrender. So what does it practically mean? To give up your life, to donate your sense of ownership of self back to the source, the unified source whence it came. How do you do that? And what does it mean? Well, first of all, what does it mean for your life? Nothing per se. So to some of you, that might alleviate some of the intimidation factor. Because a lot of our attachments are to things going a certain way, or living with our partner, or having a situation be a certain way, the way that we're used to it, and so on. So when we conflate or associate the surrender of the personal self to meaning a whole host of changes that we now have to implement in our lives, or that God will now take everything away from us and change it to something that we don't know, that causes additional intimidation and often pushes people away from this choice to simply begin to open up their sense of self, see through the fallacy of it, see that when you look directly with awareness at your sense of self, it's essentially nothing. You cannot find it. It's just a bunch of assumptions that generate sensations in the mind, that then translate as physical sensations and contractions, because again, the brain and the nervous system will reflect whatever is going on in the actual sentience of the mind. And so we contract around this. We get attachment to our current lives, and then we fear the change of that. But what I'm professing here is that, or claiming in a way, is that your surrender of your sense of self does not necessarily mean anything for your life the way it is. It doesn't have a way that it looks. It doesn't appear in a certain way. In other words, hypothetically at least, you can keep in your life everything that you currently have in your life. Your job, your partner, your house, so on and so forth, your ambitions. However, it does require some faith, because who knows how God's going to transfigure you. So you must conjure up a curiosity for that. So suppose that currently you are a man or woman of man, you are man-made, more than you are God-made. Not ultimately, obviously, not in material, not in what you're actually made of, but in terms of your thinking and your ways of deciding things and your biases and your fears and your hopes and your ambitions. Let's say that over 90% of that, at your current phase of spiritual development, is man-made, not God-made. Right? Just as an analogy, as a rough estimate. Then there must be a curiosity, a spark in your soul, if you will, a spark in the spark of the Creator, which is what you are. A curiosity. If 90% of my life is based on falsehoods, and I can pretty much guarantee you it's more than 90% of what you currently think and feel and believe and associate with and how you perceive life and all that. But let's be generous and say 90%. Let's give some optimistic feelings of, hey, we're on our way. Because the real number might be depressing. But it doesn't matter. The analogy stands. What matters is that you can make that shift, and that percentage can drastically drop very quickly, because it's up to your courage. It doesn't matter. It's almost like all you can really have is 99% of one or the other. Meaning that as soon as you pivot, the gravitational pull of that is going to take you to the 99% of the other side, leaving 1% for just human necessities, like pooping and minding your foot and step and all that stuff. And on the current side of the cycle, perhaps the 99% man-madeness, where there's 1%, is obviously your lifeline to God. It's your seeking impulse that you can never get rid of. So, at least within this lifespan, you're going to be 99% on either side of the equation. You might be in between temporarily, but you're on your way to one or the other. And this is kind of a momentum thing. It's an inertia thing. It's a gravitational pull thing. So when you pivot, my point here is that when you pivot, when you shift your intention, when you become courageous instead of scared shitless, which you all are underneath the surface when it comes down to it, and that's totally forgivable and understandable, but I hope you aspire to greater fearlessness, because you deserve it and it's truth. So when you become fearless in your choosing, even if you're not there yet, then this pivoting, this shift is going to be like a water slide. Not immediately, not right away, perhaps, depends. Case by case basis, depends on the intensity of your surrender, the intensity of your all-inness. Again, if we use the example of the person who's down on their knees, intense catalyst, everything is lost. They have nowhere else to turn to. So their pivoting decision, their courage, is going to be almost like a forced courage, but still it's going to be a courage. The courage to let things be as they are and to give away ownership, attachment, and identification with what is. They have nowhere else to go in their own thinking, and therefore their surrender can be quite complete quite immediately and can pivot them all the way to the other 99%. It happens sometimes. Eckhart Tolle is a decent example of sort of that phenomenon that most people are familiar with, as he describes in his book. This suicidal depression and then a sudden shift in consciousness where he literally conked out. I think he became unconscious, if I remember. And then when he quote-unquote woke back up, he was on the God side of things and he saw the divinity, the beauty, the oneness, the bliss in all of it. So this is a rare phenomenon. It doesn't happen that often. And it also doesn't necessarily mean that he was or is perfected all the way then from that point onwards, but it means that this pivoting or this shift has happened to such a significant degree that you're on the other side of the tipping point. The scales are now moving in the other direction, and there's nothing you can really do about it anymore. This requires some courage, yes, but I'm saying it doesn't necessarily mean your life has to look drastically different than what it looks like today. In fact, it probably won't, or if it does, not right away. It's going to transition, usually gradually. Can be rapid, depends on your time scale, your frame of reference, but gradually, nevertheless. It's very rare that someone abruptly changes every aspect of their lives when they have sort of an awakening or a surrender. It's possible. You can choose that, but it will be up to you at the end of the day, even then. But you do have to be willing and curious to decide to let this intelligence, which is not of your own thinking, you have to trust it enough to let it transfigure you. And is that, do you want that enough? Or would you rather manifest the life you think you want? This is really the crux of the question here for the advanced way. This is what will distinguish the introductory part to the advanced part. How much do you prefer to materialize your own life? How interesting is that for you? How promising is that for you? And if it is totally fine, and I don't mean to burst that bubble too much, but I will read once more what I wrote before. You can do with that whatever you wish, obviously. One of the means towards this surrender is seeing clearly how the personal life is cyclical, repetitive, deluded, in an echo chamber of its own making, thus removed from reality and truth, boring, a struggle, and ultimately fruitless, disappointing, and illusory. So who wants to manifest their own life? And if so, for how many more cycles? Or as they would say in some philosophies, for how many more lifetimes? How fun is this place really? Like, let's get real for a second. How great is this place really? Like, how fabulously, fantastically epic and incredible is your personal life really? Let's be real. Now, I really appreciate those of you who have been able to reframe their own illusory personhood into something that is seemingly beautiful. And yes, the dictum at an illusory level does stand, which is, it is as you say it is, 24/7. So if you say it is beautiful and you really persist in that seeing, it will occur to you as beautiful and you will reap the relative fruits of that. So you can do that. You can do that path of personal affirmations for the next 10,000 cycles or whatever. But you do have to wonder at some point, to what end? Because even if you attain everything that you attain, and keep in mind, you've already attained everything you wanted to attain before you got to this point. Okay, so attainment is not a future thing that will set you free. You've had the hit of attainment tens of millions of times in the course of your exploration as a soul. Keep that in mind, that next hit around the corner that you think you're so close to materializing, whether it's that perfect twin flame partner, or the next level of abundance and travel and community living, or your next spiritual insight that's going to set you free, just remember, you've attained very similar things trillions of times before. Has it set you free? You have attained. Keep in mind, you have attained the same thing that you keep yourself in bondage for now for future purposes, future attainment. Remember, you have already attained many, many times before. Did it set you free? Of course not. Why? Because your life is not real. By that I mean what you think of as your life. Again, take good care of your physical body or your apparently physical body. Don't do anything silly out of a philosophical concept. Common sense, physical common sense is a good thing to maintain throughout the spiritual journey, because there's many cuckoo ideas that could make you ungrounded. So stay grounded, at least partially, at least with your sanity and common sense, okay? Your 3D common sense. But your life is not real, meaning your whole perspective of what that is, what you is, what your life is unreal. So of course, no matter how much you attain in unreality, you will never feel totally free until you know reality as it actually is, because that's the quest of all beings, of all sparks of free will. So your greatest actual hope in the illusion is to cling to the words of a teacher and to imbibe them and practice them and try them out for yourself to the most earnest of your capacity, and to then see for yourself if it's true or not, what is being suggested. That's your best key inside of the matrix to the door that leads outside of the matrix. But no attainment in the future, no personal materialization, no fuck yes, I affirmed my way into this fit body is going to set you free. You can still do it. I work out. I'm still aware and I optimize my diet or my architecture according to my relative goals or what seems relevant to me or useful to me or beneficial. Where I detect the most benefit, I will organize myself accordingly. But this happens very naturally and clearly and skillfully, with some human research here and there as permission slips to complement or further anchor in a particular architecture or lifestyle or decision, and so on. So these things still will appear, but you do not exist inside of these. You're shepherding your instrument to some extent, and the more that you surrender, the more God will shepherd it for you. The more God will directly, this intelligence will directly reinform your body, your mind, your actions, your choices, your architecture, your inspirations, and so on, at the expense of your personal ambitions. These will be dissolved. But it doesn't mean your life has to look drastically different. You can live in the same apartment, you can be with the same people. Now, it might change over time, but that's because you'll want it to change, because you'll be different. It's not truly who you are, and it's less relevant to interact with the same people maybe, and you feel inspired by this impulse by this clarity, by this alignment, by this joy, by this happiness, by this matrix transcendent natural state of freedom, to go a different way or to carve out a different path or to meet with other people of like mind. All these things will happen. You don't have to worry about that. It's dictated by natural resonance. And when you are free and open, resonance will be clarified more and more and more. Call it intuition, call it resonance, call it guidance, whatever you will. It'll be clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer. But you'll be in agreement with whatever you choose to change in your life. Let's put it that way. The only times you're not in agreement with the things that apparently are changing in your life is prior to surrender of the personal self. And so you're projecting that same dichotomy, that same conflict within the oneness, and oneness cannot have any real conflict by definition. It can only have the illusion of everything, including conflict and dichotomy and so on. So the dichotomy that you know now, from not understanding why your life is the way that it is sometimes, what level of yourself is creating this, who is doing this to you, and what you want, and going forward with hope and ambition and so on, and trying to make the changes yourself and all that, you know that feeling of contrast and conflict and yuckiness. And you're projecting it onto, oh, but what if I'm out of control? What if I surrender my sense of self, my possession of self altogether? What if I give it back to source, to reality? What then? Then there might be more dichotomy because I won't be there to be able to control it. But I'm telling you that's a projection from what you know prior to surrender onto the state of unity and alignment that results from surrender. And you will not be in disagreement or misunderstanding of yourself on the other side of that equation, depending on the completeness of that surrender. But consider the freedom of right now, today, without announcement to your mind, without a plan for in 3 months from now, not giving it any ways out, not giving it any ways to plan and scheme to distract you at the last minute, not putting the mind in charge. What if right now, unsuspectingly on this beautiful Sunday, you could disown yourself and abide in the freedom that remains. Glimpse God and then receive more of that intelligence, that presence, that reality beyond the mind. Nothing complicated, nothing weird, nothing freaky, nothing scary. Your life is still your life. You're still going to do what you were going to do that day. You're still going to eat, have groceries, whatever, meet people. But what if internally, subtly, beautifully, gracefully, quietly, without anyone needing to know, although you might want to shout it off the rooftops for the first few days, but let's say that quietly, internally, maturely, you have disowned your life, all your rights to this life. Your only right, which you can never get rid of, is your freedom to choose. But what you're choosing is to let God transfigure, let the reality come to you. As Kabir said, I felt the need of a great pilgrimage. He didn't go anywhere. He said, so I sat still for 3 days, and God came to me. That's how pilgrimage really happens. You can go to India, you can walk your ass off if you want, but the true pilgrimage is the quietude of self, sitting still for 3 days, meaning mentally pausing personhood, self, sense, ownership, possession of it, ambition, and so on. If you can pause that for 3 days, trust me, God will come to you. In fact, God's already here, you're just not seeing the reality of it. But if you open those barn doors of your mind, you will see what's already on the other side. The wide open reality of it cannot be explained, cannot be sensed with the senses, cannot be understood by the mind, and yet it's more real than any of those aforementioned aspects of illusion. What if today you could live in bliss and grace, not changing anything about your life? Who cares? Let your life evolve as it naturally does. What if you internally right now could give up this stressful, arrogant, hubris-filled, deluded, stinky little concept of you that's producing all your control issues, problems, fears, defense mechanisms, lack of connection, which you so crave with others and yet you so resist at the same time, and all these little games. Why not be completely vulnerable for the first fucking time in your life? Come to your senses. Wake up. Be so vulnerable that you can't stand it. And then be even more vulnerable. Stop suffering. If you will. Give it all up to me. Capital M. Give it all back to Source. Give your little self back to your inner self. Capital S, the one that's watching you right now. Let that one inform you. Be under the influence of Source, not under the influence of your concept of self. Then you can live freely, without possessions, naturally generous, naturally unconditional. This whole thing about unconditional love, there is no such thing because love is not conditional ever. If it is conditional, it's not love. So love by definition is unconditional, so you don't have to even say that. Love is love. And being blind to love is being blind to love. There is no conditional love and unconditional love. There's selfishness, or there is the natural state. There's illusion and ignorance, or there is clarity, pristine clarity, profound clarity, mind transcending clarity, and isness, life as it is. But it requires your surrender, my friends. The longer you keep filling this natural seeking impulse, which you can't get rid of, it's your lifeline to Source, but as long as you keep filling it up with these personal ambitions and projections, and more thoughts, and more interpretations, you're not going to find the bedrock of existence, which is right here, right now, all the time, ever present, timelessly, so pristinely perfect, stainless, traceless, like the flight path of a bird. No thought, no emotion leaves any flight path whatsoever in the natural state of reality as it indescribably yet ever so evidently is. Surrender. Submit to what's greater than your puny little mind. Be humble. The arrogant suffer the most. The humble suffer not at all, even when they're in pain. Be utterly humble, and you will find a confidence in that humility that transcends all self-empowerment workshops you could ever attend. It's a confidence no experience, no body, no thing can take away from you. It's an optimistic, joyful, spark-like, childlike, yet ancient, timeless, generous, loving confidence that's not construed by mankind. You can't cultivate this no matter how long you meditate. It is naturally informed into you by your real self upon your surrender. But for some reason, we like to suffer and insist on what doesn't work, what's not real, what will never be real.
Thank you for watching this Bentinho Live Session. Bentinho now hosts these transformative live sessions completely free, offering profound insights and guidance to support your journey. To attend the next live session with Bentinho, simply visit massaro.university and follow the instructions to create your free account.